Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. I'm going to wake up. I'm Frank Gilliam. I'm Dean of the Luscan School, and I'm very happy to see you all here this morning for what's going to be an interesting day. We were fortunate to have a provocative and entertaining kickoff lecture last night by Jaron Lanier, and if you were there, it was an interesting talk and performance. It certainly generated conversation, and we thought it was a provocative and entertaining way to start out our event around who owns a digital city. I want to do what deans do at this point before we get going. Is there's a term I've heard from my 21-year-old daughter called humble brag. Have you ever heard this term, humble brag? So humble brag is when you say certain things with humility, but the real point is to brag about whatever it is you do or you're associated with. So I'm going to humble brag about our school. The Lusca School is about 20 years old, formed in the mid-90s. We have three disciplines, distinct disciplines: social welfare or social work, urban planning, and public policy. And like any university of our sort, we focus on research, both what would be considered basic science, but also very much applied work as we deal with real problems in real time. And we educate and train, and I see some of our students around. We like to call them change agents. We like to train them to be the kind of people that can engage in disruptive innovation in organizations and really exhibit leadership. We focus on a wide range of contemporary issues or issue domains, not surprisingly, everything from sustainability to public education to juvenile justice, housing, land use, transportation. And today's topic, how information and communications technologies are changing the governance, social experience, management, and study of our cities. And so this year we've been offering a series of convenings around the topic of digital cities. Our Lewis Center has held two big events, one at Lake Arrowhead at the UCLA facility up there, and one a recent downtown forum a month or two ago. The Luskin Center has, and all that was around smart transportation and around digital technology and public transportation. Some very interesting issues raised. My colleague Michael Storper's, one of his favorite topics is who owns the data that comes from all this public smart technology? What does smart roads mean, and who owns it, owns the information that comes from it? The Luskin Center has had a series called Public Policy for Innovation in the Digital Age, really focused on content, intellectual property, everything from music to basic scientific discoveries. So really what we've been trying to do this year is launch an initiative that takes up the question of the impact and role of digital technology in public sector decision making. It is a topic that schools like ours, I was talking to some of my colleagues from information studies, well, they think about issues like big data and the like all the time. I think for many of our folks, we're sort of latecomers to the game, but what we've discovered is that our students in particular go on to senior level management positions in the public sector. I think we have 3 or 4 mayors who are alums in the metropolitan region, and they make decisions about digital technology, and they don't have much training. So we're trying to do 2 things. One, to think about how we train our students to be public sector leaders with at least some literacy around digital technology, or 3 things really. Secondly, to figure out what a curriculum looks like around that. And then third is to think about what a research agenda looks like around these questions at a school like ours. So to be true, part of our surreptitious mission is to listen to you all closely and try to identify some of the things that make sense for us as a school and a campus to focus on. So, a couple other remarks, and though I made some to this effect last night. Why the focus on cities? I love this idea that for the first time in human history, more people in cities live in cities than metropolitan areas. It's a big deal. If you certainly, many, we were talking, Ernie was just, I know, back from traveling last night. Particularly if you travel internationally, you go to places like China and you see these. I was in Chengdu, went to Chengdu, that's Chengdu, in the middle of the, I said, oh, it's a small city, it's about 16 million, and there are all these people flocking to the urban areas, and the government doesn't know what to do. I think it's actually true in the United States. We've not quite figured out how we provide services, how we make decisions about public goods, and what is a efficient and equitable way to distribute them, and the role that digital technology plays in that. So this context provides practitioners, scholars, policymakers, and politicians with a set of difficult questions. How can we continue to add residents, provide services, maintain an enabling business climate, and ensure relative equity at the same time? In other words, how do you balance these competing forces? Now, digital technology has gotten a lot of publicity. We were talking last night about this recent set of news stories about the surveillance planes in Compton, of all places. You guys know this story? The sheriff's department had little Cessnas go and take and gather digital information about the residents of the city of Compton, of all places, and we're following individual cars. We're surveilling everything from minor misdemeanors to felony arrests, and nobody knew they were doing it. So one question for people like us is, well, what does that discussion go like in a room of public sector decision makers? And here's my take on it. Somebody says, we're going to have this presentation by these people who specialize in digital technology. Everybody goes, ooh, digital technology, that's so cool. We need digital technology, right? We got to get in that game. So, and I don't know who the company was, and I hope they're not here, but they come in and they give a slick presentation with really cool slides, and they look really cool, right? Casual, relaxed little deal. And because, you're a public sector employee, you're dazzled, and you go, all right, let's give them, $500,000 to do this. Gee, it was discovered that they did it. Now everybody's in an uproar, right? What should we do? Who owns the information? Can they do it? Should they do it? These are the kinds of sort of an extreme example of the decisions, but there's decisions every day that public sector folks are going to have to pick a choice about. So we're looking forward to today's convening of thought leaders, scholars, practitioners, entrepreneurs, futurists, visionaries. I should thank our sponsors. IBM has contributed to this, the Ford Foundation, our Vice Chancellor for Research, UCLA Engineering. I also want to thank my faculty colleagues, particularly Michael Storper and Anastasia Lukatis-Deras. Michael's here and Anastasia's over there. Wave to the nice people. They wave back. They have been faculty leaders and really thinking about the themes. Michael's produced a provocative paper outlining some of the issues we ought to be concerned about. And we've had a series of other faculty, J.R. DeShazo, Bridget Freisler, Christine Borgren, Brian Taylor, who've all participated. So we're thrilled that you're here. The Luskin School is pleased that we can have these convenings. And to get us kicked off this morning, I'm pleased to introduce Peter Marx. He is the city of, this is an interesting thing, Peter, if it's true, I assume it is. Yeah, he is the City of Los Angeles' first Chief Innovation Technology Officer. It's not that he's a Chief Innovation Technology Officer, it's that he's the first. Well, we're Los Angeles. Just me? I don't know. Peter oversees the implementation of new tools and technologies across LA City government with the goal of solving problems for residents and theoretically making City Hall work more efficiently and effectively. Before joining Mayor Garcetti's team, Peter worked in a number of positions in the private sector, at Qualcomm Labs, at Mattel, at Vivendi, Universal Games, Universal Studios. And the nice thing is that Peter is a UCLA alum. So it's always nice to have our alums do good and come back to campus. So with no further ado, Peter Marx.
Thank you for having me. So, as the dean said, my name is Peter Marx, and I don't know if I'm the first, but I've been told that I'm the first. And until somebody shows up and says, "I was really first," or something like that, who knows, right? It's not like they keep track of these things. In fact, I'm going to call out my colleague from up in San Francisco and ask if Jay was the first in San Francisco.
We'd like to say we are.
Ah, you see?
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. So it's sort of an interesting thing, and people say, so what are you going to do as the first, I have this $40 title, Chief Innovation and Technology Officer. They're all $10 words. And what are you going to do in this role? And my answer is really that there are three different aspects to it. One is working on helping the city government use technology to deliver better services. That's pretty straightforward. There's something like 45,000 employees in city government. They do everything from police and fire to building and safety to you name it, to the port, to the airport. I mean, it's a remarkably large, complicated set of services. The second aspect is, as I was crawling through traffic, anybody ever do that in Los Angeles? As I was crawling through traffic on my way over to UCLA, it's around making the city more livable. How do we use technology to make living in the city of Los Angeles better for all of us? And I think it's something that we all see, and we see through apps like Waze, for example, and Google Maps, and the Park Me app, and a whole variety of different things that are enabling, if you will, us to have a better experience. And by the way, I don't know why the mic is going in and out. So
I think you have to be closer to the mic because it cuts you off if you're quiet.
Yeah, well, the gain. So it's funny because I'm trying to speak at a sort of a monotone. But the thing about using technology to make the city more livable is that we have so many different elements of it, right? And I think this conference really speaks to a lot of these different things, and we'll talk for a minute about that. And then the third aspect of my job, if the first one is helping the government to be more, use technology to be more efficient and helpful, if the second part is around livability, then the third part is how do we make Los Angeles into the best place to frankly build businesses that are technology based. We have three really great engineering schools here. We have, in fact, I see alumni from all three. We have Caltech, we have USC, and nobody go there. And then, of course, we have UCLA. And what's interesting about it is that we don't have this branding, if you will, of being a great place to start a technology-based business. And it's something that the Office of Economic Development inside the mayor's office and I are very concerned about. How do we set up, how do we create an identity and an ecosystem of tech startups, similar to what we see up north and in New York and other places, because amongst other things, not only do we have these three great engineering and science universities, but we also are the #2 destination for venture capital. We have, the county tells me that we have more people with doctorates living in the Los Angeles region than anywhere else in the country. Who knew? In any case, so 3 elements. But for the Luskin Conference on Digital Cities, I was asked if I could bring no more than 3 slides. I only brought 4. And let's talk about, quote unquote, who owns the digital city, because it's sort of a fascinating time. I think we would all agree. A couple days ago, I don't know if you were following the news. Anybody know what this is? It's a what? Yeah. Yeah. It's the Zanja Madre. It's the mother ditch, as they call it in Spanish, otherwise known as the original water supply for the city of Los Angeles. And it's a sort of a fascinating thing, because if you think about the infrastructures that have been built over the years between water and the roadways, the electrical and everything else, what we're watching right now is the development of a digital infrastructure. And the digital infrastructure, and I think my colleague at the back of the room, Steve Reneker, who will be on a panel later on today, and I very much agree that the digital infrastructure that goes into the city of Los Angeles is as important as any other infrastructure that has been built. And so in the ITA and in the mayor's office, we've started a community broadband project to go and invite the private world and any interested party, including the universities, to help us figure out how we're going to go and have a high-speed broadband, preferably fiber optic-backed network across the city of Los Angeles that will, be at a class that will support the needs of everybody here. Because if there's one thing that's true, is that demand for broadband, demand for internet access is not going down. It only increases. And if you will, I think we're at this moment where we're seeing an incredible amount of investment going into the digital infrastructure, but it's not being done against a greater policy discussion. And I'll give some simple examples, which is that the telecom companies have been coming to me in the 2.5 months that I've been in City Hall, saying, we're trying to get through the permitting process. We want to deploy more and more, frankly, fiber optics and wireless base stations and macro cells and femtocells and everything else. And it takes too long to get permits in the city of Los Angeles. Part of the reason why is because due to all the cost cutbacks, the budget cutbacks that we've seen in the city over the last number of years, the permit office for issuing permits just for wireless and wired broadband access in the city is limited to, I think, every other Tuesday for something like 2 hours. That's like a perfect example where the city can go and say, okay, let's fix this. And of course we will. And the digital infrastructure, again, is so important that when there was the shooting that happened at LAX, for example, you probably have noticed that LAX's, well, maybe you haven't, or maybe you have, LAX's cellular capabilities have been improved fairly dramatically over the last number of months, and they will continue to be. And part of the reason why is because when that incident happened on November 10th last year, there were the cell phone companies, and this is nothing against them. It's really just an indicator, if you will. But there was insufficient infrastructure at LAX, partly because of the interactions between the airport and the cellular companies and so on, that there were literally hundreds of thousands of dropped calls because people were trying to make phone calls at the time that this thing happens. And it just tells you that resiliency, having the ability to go and access the digital network is something that is incredibly important. And here's a policy point that I think all of you should consider as you go through the day, which is that the last earthquake that happened in Los Angeles was in what year? Anybody? Yes. I know. Yeah. It's funny, I didn't think there would be a debate about it because, I mean, I was moving from a house up there to an apartment in Santa Monica and doing a startup in Santa Monica, and all 3 locations got trashed in the earthquake. So I remember it quite well. But when was the World Wide Web start? When did the World Wide Web start? Not the internet, I don't want to get into the technical discussion. 93. Well, roughly roughly at the same time. In fact, if you think about it, it was well before the iPhone. It was well before this incredible usage that we see on the internet. We haven't had a big seismic event. And we're lucky enough that we have the chief scientist for the USGS working as a science advisor for Mayor Garcetti, Lucy Jones, is really focused on seismic resiliency. But if you think about the last time that we had a big event here in the city of Los Angeles, it was actually just before this dependence that we have now on the internet. And when there was the earthquakes that happened a few weeks ago, the first place that I looked was on Twitter. And those who may know, the first article that was published by the Los Angeles Times was actually generated by a computer off of an automated feed. And it's kind of a fascinating subject if you think about it, because we're now in a place that we get our emergency information. In fact, we get almost all information wirelessly, wired, through the internet. So let's talk about LA for a second. This is a graphic that was funded by the Goldhirsch Foundation, by Good, for the Los Angeles Department of Transportation and a number of other agencies. And it's kind of a fascinating look, if you will, at what we have today. I was driving down the street as I was trying to get here. But everybody here is familiar with Wilshire. And if you think about Wilshire, it's this really fascinating combination of cultures, of businesses, of physical infrastructure. It's a journey through time. It's a journey through the city of LA. And as you go through it, one of the things that we will talk about, I'm sure that people will start mentioning things like autonomous and connected vehicles. Well, when you start thinking about I had somebody yesterday tell me that they wanted to do autonomous vehicles in Los Angeles, and that the solution was that we needed to set up a separate roadway, a separate infrastructure that was specifically for autonomous vehicles. And my reaction to him was, well, quite frankly, that you have to really take into effect the human element of this. It's always a really good engineering approach to make it clean. Take all the humans out, if you will. If you can control for the humans, you can make a system that works really easily. But in the city of LA, when we're talking about digital, and one of the most valuable parts of an automobile these days is the connectedness of that automobile. So when you're thinking about the digital city, we're also talking about vehicles. They're passing through an incredibly complicated human environment. And it's something that I spent the last 3.5 years at Qualcomm, which is a company that's really electrical engineering based and software engineering based. And Qualcomm's operations exist all over the world. Something like 90 or 95% of its business comes from overseas. And it contributes technologies into the mobile world on a spectacular basis. But in essence, when you're inside of companies like that, and I think this is where the Luskin School can really help drive the conversation, you have to think about what physical, human, social, cultural elements are. How many people here were at Jaron Lanier's talk last night? So he used a really interesting phrase, and I'll just paraphrase it. He said that we need a thickly connected social network to have an information middle class. And I'm still trying to think about exactly what that means, but I will say that my guess is that the cultural elements that we see in a dense city, or even a moderately dense city like Los Angeles, are a key aspect of this. Anybody know what this is? Yeah. It's a relatively elderly map of the internet. In fact, my boss, Rick Cole, at City Hall the other day said it kind of looks like Los Angeles. Probably can't see the mouse. But, there's sort of the universities over here, and, there's downtown LA over here, and so on. It doesn't bear any relationship to the physical world. But it's a map from the Opti project of the internet. And what it really is trying to do is it's trying to say that the speed of light, which is, 186,000 miles a second. We could get more specific if we really want to. Doesn't understand culture and the physicality. And one of the challenges that we have in the city of Los Angeles as we think about the digital infrastructure do we want that digital infrastructure to be based here? And what I mean by that is, are the servers, are the data sets, are the worlds, the actual services and information and data providers, are they going to be literally here in the city of Los Angeles? And I would argue that they are, because most of those information providers, as Jaron very repeatedly said last night, most of those information providers are us. They're the people. We're the ones, if you will, who are feeding into the social networks. We're the ones who are tweeting and blogging and posting and moving and everything else. We're the ones who are doing transactions. And I think that the aspect around the digital city that is sort of fascinating is when you start to think about the map between the physical world and the digital world, and how policymakers will respect privacy, meaning that our data remains our own, wherever possible. And I think the Compton discussion is sort of an interesting one. But in addition, will the digital infrastructure allow us, and the digital city allow us to maintain our identity as a city? Or are we, in fact, going to be receiving a lot of services? Is our city going to become dependent upon other places? And I'll give you an example, which is that Las Vegas, there's a company called Switch. And Switch is sort of a fantastic co-location center. I think there are 9 buildings now that they have. And they're suspended, and they're air conditioned, and they're some fantastic amount of power usage. And one of the things about Switch is that they market themselves as being not Los Angeles and not the East Coast, but that they're the place where the digital infrastructure goes. And I think that that's something that we have to think about. How are we, in fact, going to have a digital city that lives here, and as well as the physical city? And then finally, there's another thing, which is that we're starting to see the emergence of true digital narratives. I was talking with a friend of mine, Francois Barr from USC, who told me that he was very happy because we had talked about an alternative reality game called Ingress. Anybody familiar with Ingress? So Ingress is a alternative reality game between 2 sides, arbitrarily chosen, blue and green. The creative person behind the game actually lives just a few blocks away over in Westwood. And it's published by a company called Niantic Labs, which is a division of another company called, well, you've heard of it, Google. And it's got something like 3.5 million users at this point. And what they do is that they take their phones and they literally walk into the public places, the parks, near the fountains, the statues. In fact, Francois could probably tell us where the nearest portal is from this building right now. Because what's happening is that it's literally blue versus green, if you will. But in order to play the game, you have to go out into the physical city, and you have to be a part of the narrative, and you have to interact with people who you may not ever know physically. You could be playing a game with somebody who you will never recognize in the real world, but that you're interacting with as you're acquiring, activity points and experience, exotic matter, and all that, as you're either on the human-loving resistance or on the, the other side, those alien, I don't want to go there, but the green. And I just want to point out that City Hall, which is located in the middle of the picture, is firmly human. So, long story short, when it comes to the question of who owns the digital city, I think it's really an open question for all of us to work on. I think that there's, the city of Los Angeles right now is in this sort of interesting phase. There are more construction cranes in the city of Los Angeles and more construction happening in LA than in any other major city in the United States. We're the number 1 or number 2 media market in the world. Not in the world, in the country. And we need to have, if you will, a broadband infrastructure to support all the emerging use cases. If you're going to start to have connected vehicles, according to KPMG, the value of connectivity in your automobile is 20% of the value of the car, which is kind of remarkable. Having connectivity is more valuable than having a motor in a car, according to KPMG and their focus groups. But if we're going to have this digital city arising on top of this physical city, I think there are so many different policy issues for us to consider. You know, I'll finish with one minor comment as we lead into the big data panel. But the Los Angeles Police Department, the LAPD, has done a remarkable thing. They have used big data to go and look at burglaries and grand theft auto and theft from automobiles through crime reports. And they worked with a company called Palantir, and they worked with a group of folks out of UCLA. And what they did was that they figured out that property crimes happened in very, very specific places at very specific times. I mean, literally, boxes that were 500 feet on a side. And their approach, which is called predictive policing, it's almost like out of a movie, and we all know which movie. Their objectives are to go and put a police presence, meaning to have the police cars on their patrols literally drive through these very closely defined boxes. And if a policeman is there, that they won't necessarily arrest anybody, but that the crime won't happen. And it's kind of fascinating, because if you look now in the 10 weeks that I've been working in the public sector, people have told me the crime rate in the city of Los Angeles is down to where it was in 1952 or 1951, or even somebody said that it's down to 1949. I don't really care. It's all before I was born. We're at a place where crime levels haven't been seen at this level in 60 years. And it's kind of remarkable. And it's because the Los Angeles Police Department has used big data and some really, really good, frankly, intellectual, analytic thought to go and use the digital data that comes out of the city to go and make the city into a more livable, safer place. It's kind of remarkable. So thank you very much for having me. It's impossible for me to speak on behalf of Google, but I will say the following, which is that Niantic Labs was founded by a guy by the name of John Hinkey, who is famous for having done keyhole systems, otherwise known as Google Earth. And if you will, they have two apps. They have one called Field Trip, and they have another called Ingress. And I'm kind of fascinated by it, because I did a lot of context awareness work at Qualcomm, a lot of proximity stuff and mapping and everything else. And so I look with a great deal of interest at what they're doing with these games, because I see, I don't know whether they're collecting data, but what I see is that I see, I was coming back from the airport the other night from a trip with Steve Reneker in the back, and I found myself detouring a few blocks because I needed to go capture an alien portal. And I'm 50. And if it's making me do things, I kind of find that sort of fascinating. Now, I have done a lot of video games in my life. I worked for EA and other places. But I thought maybe it was just me, right? But then Professor Barr from USC admitted to me today that one of his great joys of the day was capturing a portal because he had to pick up somebody at a hotel down the street. And so I realized that now there's two of us, and maybe there's a trend line. Yes, sir.
Hi. Sorry, I'll apologize for bringing up Google again in a second question. But I was wondering about the city using things like, now that Facebook and Google seem to be setting up infrastructure through drones to have more connected environments by using drones that are eternally up there throwing signals. Are things like, is the city using those kinds of relationships to grow the infrastructure, or is it is it more infrastructural growth that the city will put together, or is it more cooperating with private companies like Google and so on, and those kinds of projects to make the connectedness better?
Well, Okay, so let me break your question into two pieces, because I think you were asking about drones and you're asking about infrastructure. So the city of LA, I personally have not seen any use of drones by the city of LA. So I don't know of any. The FAA has not said that LA County is one of the UAV sites, although I think, well, I won't speculate, but there's something like 15 UAV sites. Los Angeles is not one of them. On the infrastructure side, the approach towards infrastructure is really twofold. One is that the city itself uses a lot of connectivity. We have a lot of employees. We have a lot of mobile employees. We have a lot of people who are police officers and sanitation workers. We have people who are doing permits and building and safety. We have people working at the library and at the airport and so on. And so we use a lot of communications infrastructure just to run the government. And as such, we can use that, and the LA Community Broadband Network proposal suggests using those funds, if you will, to not only help employees but also help the citizens by helping to fund, if you will, a better infrastructure. But I think that the key to getting a truly good world-class broadband infrastructure is both on the public side but also on the private side. AT&T, Verizon, Time Warner Cable, Comcast, everybody looks at the city of LA and says, this is a place where there are a lot of people in a high density who use the internet. So we're a natural place for them to invest in. And I would expect that they will continue to. And the job that we have in the city is to make it easier and better for them to do it in every possible way. So I just want to mention one other thing before I leave, which is that towards the end of May, we're going to publish around 170 data sets from the city of LA. We're going to publish data.lacity.org. And we'll throw an event and everything else. But the thing about it is that we're following in the footsteps of cities like San Francisco, for example, and New York and so on, by taking all the data that we can from the city of LA and making it available to people inside the city, but also outside the city. So for example, if you are going to do a parking app, it'd be really good to know what the parking regulations are everywhere and where the parking meters are. If you're going to actually improve crime or transportation or whatever it happens to be, or look at the budget, we're on a mission, if you will, to find every data set that we can publish and make available. And that'll happen towards the end of May. So with that, thank you very much.